when we go live to YouTube.
I know. Everybody make a pleasant face while Zoom is setting us up here.
How is
Okay,
church
here we
going?
go. We are on.
Northern Michigan.
There we are,
Is-
making
Are,
pleasant expressions.
are we all? Are we good?
We are on. So we'll just wait for folks to start to come in.
Is it
So is it?
beautiful in Tucson today?
Oh my gosh. I was going to send you a video, but I decided you would probably be very mad at me.
Thank you.
But my whole yard is like full of flowers and smells.
It is. It's pretty here today. It's chilly still, but we do have flowers and blue sky.
Oh,
It,
well,
loo-
that's good.
it
It
looks
actually looks a lot
very
like the
much,
picture behind me.
yeah, it looks like the picture behind Donna,
Yeah,
almost exactly.
but closer.
Our blue is a little different blue than your blue.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, you're Michigan blue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're
Well, we are a blue in Michigan.
I figured you'd catch that.
Careful.
I guess we shouldn't tease on this call.
Well, there are always wolverines lurking among us, so we have to be kind.
And we are. Oh, I still have church pulled up. Oh, there we are making pleasing faces. That's cute.
I took you seriously, Kit. Now my picture is terrible.
That's usually what I look like, Mindy.
There are
Oh.
always wolverines lurking among us, so we have.
I got that side. You think I'd have figured this out by now? 11 people.
Oh no, we're up to 16 now.
Okay, good.
So why don't we go ahead and get started? And Donna, I'd like you to introduce Debbie because she's
My
your
pleasure.
friend.
Yep. It is my delight to introduce you all to the Reverend Canon Debbie Royals. We've known each other longer than we can really keep track of, which is a whole other story. She is Pasquayaki in Tucson and the canon for Native American Ministries in the Diocese of Tucson and the vicar of St. Raphael in the desert.
In the valley.
In the valley. In the valley. She has worked with a national church on a whole range of issues, including Native American ministry, and is a faculty member for Credo, which is clergy wellness program from the Church Pension Fund. And how else would you like us to know you, Debbie?
Oh, Donna. Leo Senciani. My name is Debbie Royals. I am Pasquayaki on my mother's side, and Eastern Cherokee actually on my dad's side. But I was raised Pasquayaki as a Pasquayaki woman, and although I recognize the contributions of my father's family and the history, it's not one that I'm willing to claim beyond that because I wasn't really raised in that tradition. My mother is 99, and I have 2 siblings and 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. My grandmother and our family grew up in the central part of Tucson on a little ranch. Now that there are big box stores, storage boxes, businesses, dense population, all kinds of different things that have surrounded that land of the village. But the old Pascua settlement where I grew up was established before Arizona was a state, and very much in that same time period when the U.S. and Mexico border divided us. With the Gadsden Purchase. So this isn't a 1492 story. This is personal experience that I can talk to you about from my mother and my grandmother and my own experience, both as a Native woman in the United States as well as a Native woman in the Episcopal Church. I think I can just kind of keep going with these thoughts, right, that we talked about. I wasn't raised as an Episcopalian. I came to the church already understanding my role, though, and identity in my village as a healer, as a spiritual leader, and as a student. I continue today still trying to do my best to live into those roles, and I've tried very hard to be both fully Native and fully Christian. It's not a unique experience. There are many people that I can tell you about that are both Native and Christian, but it is one that continues to challenge me, not on the Native side, interestingly enough, but as a Christian. And part of that challenge comes from the challenge we face to choose our Native religion and spirituality against the Christian culture and tradition and experience. From the time that I came into the Episcopal Church, I think I was raised up very quickly to serve in all kinds of different capacities, as Donna mentioned. I've served both as the provincial leader for Native Ministry in Province 8 and the Episcopal Church's Indigenous Ministry in the Anglican Communion as a writer and presenter for the Lambeth Conference. I didn't recognize, though, for quite a while that my invitation to participate was often to fill a role to look fully diverse rather than being chosen or asked to serve because of the gifts that I was given to steward. So you're not going to be surprised when I tell you that the Episcopal Church has been a challenge for me in a lot of ways. The Episcopal Church made a full apology to Native Americans and signed a new covenant or treaty with us at Jamestown, promising, among other things, that we would have full inclusion of Native people in every level of the church. That event was followed by an even grander gathering of over 2,000 people celebrating our survival at the National Cathedral. And there have been resolutions that too many to number and name for you, but decades, for instance, of remembrance, recognition, and reconciliation, which have been renewed 3 times, so over 3 decades, and the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery, which interestingly enough happened and was not widely publicized in the Episcopal Church and more well known as other denominations followed suit to our brave first step. And I'm not sure how many people in your community are actually aware of these resolutions and what they would mean. I'm serving now on my homeland here in Tucson as the Canon for Native Ministry, as Donna mentioned. I accepted this call from our former bishop, who, when he invited me to come onto the staff as the Canon for Native Ministry, also invited me to step into a system that was not necessarily one that I was willing to step into. And that was that we were Native people were referred to as a program group or a project. In other words, a problem to be solved, right? Not full inclusion by any means. I resisted that history, and I claimed instead that we would become, as we should, as the 3rd largest population of Native Americans in the United States, behind California and Oklahoma, that we should be functioning reflective of the values of Native people that we are claiming to serve. So our Council for Native American Ministry was established with those values that resemble Native gatherings. We gather in a circle. We let our elders speak first. When we share food at every gathering, except during COVID. Decisions are made by consensus, one mind, one heart, and one voice. And of course, you can see that these are in many ways a form of resistance in the world where we're functioning mostly in a dysfunctional democratic society where it is based on winners and losers. It's especially not helpful when we need to maintain the control and the determination of how and what our lives should look like, particularly when we're talking about not only the church, but the government around us. Our diocese has also identified that those resolutions of General Convention likely had no impact for the most part because they have really come from the top down in a very hierarchical system, voted on a General Convention with actually no actions attached to them, and certainly not coming up as a result of actions from the people. And our answer to that has been that we decided that in order for things to change, and because of our status and the number of Native Americans in the United States, we had to take the first step in doing things in the right way. And that was that we passed a resolution at our own convention of remembrance, recognition, and reconciliation, and that is attached to land acknowledgement. So there are 22 federally recognized tribes in Arizona. And that also means, for those of you who know the size of the state, there isn't a congregation in our diocese that isn't on Native land. So we passed a resolution requiring that all of our congregations recognize the traditional people of the land that they're on. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we have 100% participation and support of that. We're still working on it. Arizona is a very conservative state politically, and that bleeds very much into the way that they function in the church. But we are making a lot of headway. The second thing that we have done is that we have so that lives into the remembrance and recognition part, and reconciliation, where I'm going with this, is what we're talking about today with reparations. The other way that we live into this is our relationships with Native people are not in the typical church to Native people perspective. In other words, we're not taking care of the poor Indians. All of our relationships are based on partnerships. It's a two-way street. Our hope has been that our parishes and our communities, congregations will learn with and for their relationship with Native communities, and that's how we've been functioning as we continue to build. I'll never forget, though, that Bishop Jennifer Redall is our bishop here in Arizona. She's just over a year old here, not a little more than a year, 2 years old. And one of the very first conversations I had with her included her question, what would reparations look like for Native people? I tell you, I just had to pause for a minute when she asked me that question, because I thought to myself, the most immediate reaction that I could have is that we in the church seem to want to jump so quickly to the fixing of a problem instead of being in the problem. What is it that we say, that living through the difficulty rather than going through it rather than around it, right? And I felt like her question really had sort of that underneath, but I reassured her that we were taking the right steps by passing the resolution that we have with recognition and remembrance, that you can't reconcile with people you don't even know. And if you don't have a relationship with folks, it's very difficult for you to have any sense of what needs to be done. It's also a difference in the patterns in which we function in the church, right? Where we tell people who are in the margins what they need. We tell them how we're going to help them. We tell them how we will fix the problem. There's not a lot of asking. So the invitation to speak with you today, I listened to the presentation last week, and I wanted to note again the book, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, The Indigenous Peoples History of the United States. You don't really need to buy it. I have it in PDF form if anybody wants it. So I'll be happy to send it to you. It's not easy for non-Native people to read, although we've encouraged book studies in our diocese using that. And the almost immediate reaction from that and the congregations who have done Sacred Ground is this: why didn't we learn this in school? Why is this not history that we know? And I can't tell you the reason for that. I could probably be snippy about it and give you some sense of what I think about that, but it stands to reason that, again, how are we to reconcile with people that we don't even know, that we don't know the history, we don't claim the history, and we don't claim our part in the history? I mentioned to you that the Episcopal Church had repudiated the doctrine of discovery. And I think that it's important for us to know what the doctrine of discovery is. I sent Donna a link yesterday that the folks in Upper Michigan are actually hosting a training on the doctrine of discovery. These are the Native Ministry folks in Upper Michigan. So your neighbors, I think it would be helpful if you can pass that around. That'd be great. Maybe you can stick it in the chat box for people. But the doctrine of discovery, oftentimes people want to blame it on the Holy See of Rome, right? And then the papal bulls that have continued to challenge our democracy even today in the way that it was and still is being enacted. One example, Donna and I have talked about this. I've talked about it in a number of different venues. If you don't think that this is something that is today, and I already said to you, my history is my mom's and my grandmother's, one that I lived, not 1492, but every Native person can tell you that the government determines whether we're Native or not. And I don't know if you realize that or not. They determine whether or not you are Native based on blood quantum levels or pedigree. And pedigree is only exercised in 2 other places, with dogs and horses. It's not easy to be placed in the category where my identity is being told to me in the first place, but even worse, when I realize that my identity is being identified by these processes that are also processes used for, not that I don't love dogs or horses, but so that's one thing. And I think that that's important for us to know, because I don't know any folks who immigrated to this world that are English or French or Italian or, Irish or anything, that are determined whether they are or not because our government has tested them, or their governments where they came from tested them and determined whether or not they could claim that heritage or not. I don't think any of those folks also that immigrated to this land are told what land belongs to them and what boundaries that they must live in. I don't think that we understand that the experience of being told that you are to live on a reservation with your people is a segregation of people. It is one that this government in the United States has fought to overcome its history with, but we continue to do it. And we do it because we don't recognize that that is actually what is going on. We have to acknowledge those things again before you can change it. I've been asked by a group of women in the Episcopal Church recently that I had been part of this spiritual community that I've left. And I've left it primarily because of my experience with how they see Native people and their relationship to Native people. Very early on, I went to their mother house. Donna knows about these people. I won't mention names, but we were in a conversation during that visit about the Native people who actually were on this land, and it was in their archives and records that this land was actually land that was owned by a Native family in a community around them. And one of the people there who is in charge, the executive director, said to me, "Well, what could we do to make reparations?" And I said, "Give the land back." And she looked at me with sort of this shocked face and said, "Do you have any idea how much this land is worth?" And I said, "Yeah, your soul. That's how much it's worth." Reparations are a difficult subject, and it's not one that I would suggest that we're in any positions to address at this point. I think we've made a lot of progress. I think we are making a lot of progress. The fact that All Saints has decided to invest some time and some energy into these conversations around reparations gives me great hope. It gives me hope that the church is moving and that we are eventually going to see that when we talk about justice for all, full inclusion, that we are actually meaning that, and that every person, God willing, will be able to lead and live a right relationship with God, easily connected to each other, just as they have been for centuries and centuries before. Tioki Utesia, I thank you for this invitation to be with you today, and I'm humbled by you and the fact that you are doing this work.
Thank you, Debbie.
Let's introduce Mindy before we
Okay.
get going. Mindy, do you want to introduce yourself instead?
Yes. So first of all, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of the words that you just shared with us. I think they are so vitally important for us to hear again and again. My name is Mindy Morgan. I am an associate professor of anthropology here at Michigan State University, and I've had the honor and opportunity to work with a number of different communities on issues of language endangerment and language reconciliation and language maintenance. Worked in the Northern Plains, and I've also worked a little bit here within the Great Lakes area as well. As I mentioned, I'm a professor of anthropology, but I'm also a member of the American Indian and Indigenous Studies faculty as well here at Michigan State University, and had an opportunity to help with and work with the Anishinaabe program also that's offered by MSU.
Okay, thank you. Now I think we can start with some conversation, and in a little bit we'll start adding in questions from the chat.
And we are at this moment on Anishinaabe land.
Thank you.
Yeah, that Matt Polly included in the chat, Mindy's husband Matt included in the chat a few minutes ago, but we'll say that out loud.
Good.
Do you want to start, Donna? I actually do have a question.
Okay, you go then, Kim.
That segues from being on Anishinaabe land. How might a majority white Anglo congregation like ours begin to do even some kind of land acknowledgement that was authentic and real? We have a big plaque in our entry hall that says this land was given for All Saints Church by the Folker family. And I look at that and I think, well, and where did the Folker family get it? So it seems that we need to do some looking at the land that we actually sit on, but how do we do that in a way that isn't like what you just said, that is just like, oh, we'll do this thing and then we'll feel better because we did a thing?
Well, I think that there are different ways in which people look at land acknowledgements, and I think there isn't, I would say, an agreement across the board within Native communities about land acknowledgement. There are a couple of websites that I would direct you to that have done a good deal of work, Native people who have done work in providing different perspectives on this so that you can read what those perspectives might be and see which one feels authentic to you. I don't think that it ever does any harm at all for all of us to recognize the traditional people of the land where we are. Once we've determined who those people are, to actually make that statement in and of itself is that first step in recognition, right? And then I think the work that continues from that. So just making that statement, for instance, we say it at the beginning of our worship services on Sunday, principal services. Some people have put it on their websites. Other people, we have written a prayer for each of the 6 forms of the prayers of the people that can be put right into that form, and that seems to be a little bit more palatable for some of the more conservative congregations. But the next step beyond that is now knowing what is the history of the people. It's just like you just said, Kit, you know that the plaque says this was given from this family, and then asking that next question, but where did that family, you just said that, where did they get the land, and was it land that was in their family? And if it was it land prior to that occupied? And most likely it was. And what was that history of how the native people from that land got run off or driven off from that land? And to talk about that, I think, out loud, because then recognizing, so we not only remember the people, but we recognize the history, then we can start talking about how that might still be happening and in what ways. Like, where are these people now? And what is their relationship to your present location? I also suspect, and I say this to you out of my own experience here in Arizona, there are a number of Native people in the Episcopal Church who do not identify themselves to us. And they don't identify themselves to us because they, I'm sure, are traumatized by the history of the Episcopal Church and Native people, and have either chosen to give up their identity, right, or to put it to the side, or talk about it in terms of my grandmother was full-blooded or my whatever, but never claiming the identity themselves, because as Mindy can probably tell you, the language is part of the genocidal tract of how Native people have been systematically gotten rid of, or at least the attempts are there to get rid of them using lack of language knowledge. You don't know the language, you don't know the land, because the land and the language are directly related to each other. Our songs and our dances have descriptions of the land in them, and some words that we have in our own language are not even translatable in English because of what they describe. So I hope that helps you to see that I don't think that it hurts to take that first step to have a land acknowledgement, but the rest of the process needs to follow if it's going to make any difference to anyone. Yeah.
The dog was barking. I muted myself. We included in the announcement that went out the link that you sent us to the ABC news story.
Oh, good.
Very good. One of the many things that struck me is the elder who said America owes its people the truth.
Yeah.
This isn't about learning a foreign history. It's not about other people. It's about us. It's about learning our history, our shared history, and our personal history.
Right.
Which is the thing you were saying about so many people who say, why didn't I learn this in school?
Yeah. Well, and as you noticed, if you watched and read all the videos and read all of the written parts of that website, it was from ABC's Turning Point. They actually did an excellent job, but there were, even there, when we talk about reparations, they were talking about reparations in the form of sovereignty and reparations in the form of just recognizing that they exist.
Yeah.
And those two experiences can easily be explained when you look at the fabric of the United States, and particularly the movement of colonization happening from the East Coast going west. And that, as the history gets more dated, I think you have more people who would like to see their sovereignty honored. And the people in the Southwest, California, with the more recent history like ourselves, just want to be recognized.
Yeah.
You know, the Pascua Yaqui people were not recognized until 1978. That's why I always say I was Yaqui before Yaqui was cool. You know, I knew I was Yaqui before they told me I was Yaqui. In fact, I remember still my grandmother saying when it came time for registration, "Why do I need to register? I know I'm Yaqui." They don't need to tell me that, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the other people in that video, one of the grandmothers said, justice will be when my grandchildren don't have to tell these stories any longer.
Yeah.
That same theme of recognition, of knowing the stories, of recognizing, not just recognizing other people, but recognizing our part as white communities in that history, that it is in fact a shared history. It is our history and we have some responsibility for it.
Well, and I think the responsibility of telling the history, Donna, also would help us to be more just in making decisions as a democratic society. You know, when I tell people, for instance, when I say, you know, our children are still being stolen, and they say, how can that be? You know, there's the Indian Child Welfare Act. Well, yes, but the court finds every single way it can possibly find to remove a child from an Indian or a Native family and place them in a non-Native family. What quicker way to get rid of the Indian? You know, it goes back, it harks back to that kill the Indian, save the man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I say to people, you know, do we understand that our law enforcement does not find any need to research or investigate the disappearance of missing and murdered Native women in every area, whether we're talking about borderlands, Canada, Indian country, here in the Southwest, right? But why would they want to investigate that? Because if they can get rid of the women who bear the children, you can get rid of the children, right? You can stop procreating. There's another genocidal act. It's a way to eliminate people. So when we talk about our laws, you know, we talk about the extraction of resources from the land. Yes, there were treaty lands that were set up, but treaties are not being honored because now the government decided, oh gosh, we gave this land to these Native people, but we need to get we need to get the resources out of the land. So we need the water, or we need to mine it, or we need to whatever. And they just come in and take it, right? Because it's theirs to take. You know, it's the plenary power that is so obviously present in all that we do, that is a result of the doctrine of discovery, that basically is saying that the U.S. government, and we could place this across the world because I'm presently serving on the delegation for the Episcopal Church at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous People. I hear my sisters and brothers from across the world saying exactly the same thing. That the government thinks that it can tell us what we need and how we need it and why we need it and when we need it. So that, again, reparations, the one statement about sovereignty, how we have not still learned how to be a sovereign nation within a sovereign nation and to be respectful of the laws of the land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to go back. So I think that just kind of carrying on a little bit, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more, because I think it's very helpful. I appreciated what you said, that people want to jump towards either reconciliation or reparations without going through the hard work. And I think that knowing the history, of course, is critical, but then also knowing the very diversity of Indigenous and Native peoples on this continent as well as across the world, that there's, you know, that there's many different sorts of histories. And so what kind of reparations would look like, there has not been, it's difficult to say kind of a one size fits all when communities have had different sorts of experiences. They're bound by different sorts of treaties and so forth like that. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the fact of just kind of the kind of the range of that that Native communities have experienced in the United States that would make kind of this idea of some sort of a one-size-fit-all reparations not tenable.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, Mindy. There's no way for us to say this is what we all need to do, and then everything will be all right, right? Because the history is, as you said, from 1492 until the present, we have an ongoing history being made, and those wrongs are continuing to appear. They started back in 1492, and they continue as they go, west, mostly, I would say. Um, so when you talk about the history and what I said to Kit about recognizing whose land you're on, it begins that process, right? Because it helps you to once you know the history, if you find out the true history, right? Not the US's version of the history, but the true history of the land you're on, you may stumble upon something that would give you some direction that would then direct the congregation or the diocese towards looking at this is something that needs to be made right. I'll give you a good example. When I was serving in Northern California as the missioner for Native American Ministry, I made a discovery that there was a church in a coastal area that had been built on this land, and that the church was actually never part of a sale or a purchase, right? So what happened is that there had been a church, it burned. The native woman whose family owned the land had another building close by, said you can use this building for the church until you figure out what needs to be done. From that point on, the diocese decided that it was part of their diocesan properties, and they just completely kept it in that, and that's not, I'm not, like pointing a finger, but you see those kinds of things don't get uncovered until somebody is looking at that story. And it was up to the bishop at that point to be able to actually make a formal apology and go back to that family and say, oh my gosh, it was led to us. It was not given to us. This land, and let us give you something for the use of this land all this time, because you've not had access to it while we've been using it. There was no rent paid, no sale price ever made, nothing had been done. And they were able to finally sit down. It was a very, very difficult conversation. The folks from Northern California's Native community from that family were not happy. So it takes the skill also of being able to work in that model of listening, right? I always say I love Judge Judy. She says we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Because, it really takes listening. We need to listen. Bishop Stephen Charleston wrote this wonderful resource called The Good News years ago when the church was struggling with the division over Gene Robinson. There are resources out there that can be used in a native, non-native community for conversations that works. So I would really encourage that. I hope that, people will take a look at that. We're doing this in Arizona, Mindy, and right now, like I said, our diocese, just recognizing the sheer fact that there are no congregations that are not on Native land. We know that there's some buried history that we're starting to just now uncover. And until we really get a handle on that and are able to sit down and really have conversations even amongst ourselves and then go back to the Native communities, it's going to be really hard for us to live up to, I think, all of the wrongs that have been done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You want to go to YouTube? You're muted now.
Now I'm unmuted. Okay. The first question we have is from Dustin, and he wonders, have there been any substantial challenges to the government measuring blood quantum, and are steps being taken to change or stop that?
Well, that's a good question, Justin. There's a sort of a resistance movement going on. Our tribe is not is one of those. We are enrolling Pasquayaki people, even though the rolls are closed. We are enrolling them because we are doing it in the way that we traditionally identify ourselves, which is through our familial connections. So we have a number of new persons who are newly enrolled Pasquayaki people. I think that that is probably being done in more places than not. We always ask ourselves, you know, and I was probably one of the first to raise this in our community when there was such an upheaval about enrollment, is that we need to ask ourselves why we need to be enrolled. I think my grandmother was onto something when she said, I don't need somebody to tell me that I'm Yaqui, I already know it. Some people that are non-native think that when we enroll that somehow we get checks every month or some, you know, wonderful bonus or lottery or something that happens. But that's not actually the way it works. So I think the question needs to be, I think there are a lot of people, yes, Native communities who are enrolling people without using the government's guidelines. But secondly, I think we need to start asking ourselves, why do we need to ask for enrollment if we already know it? Yeah.
Is the flip side of that sort of the Elizabeth Warren kerfluffle, where
Yeah.
her genealogy proved that yes, she had Native blood, but the tribe said, but you've never lived as a member of the tribe, you know? We have to
Right.
say if you're one of us. You don't get to say that.
And that's a great example, Kit, because that is more of the Native process of identifying persons who are part of the tribe. You know, that is oftentimes also, I mean, we've seen it even in the Westerns and in the movies where somebody's adopted into a Native community, right? A non-Native person, because it has to do with relationship. And relationship is deeply embedded into how we identify ourselves. You know, when Donna's worked overseas, when she's worked in these different communities of people, there are people who have embraced her totally as one of them, you know, because she has become one of them. And I think that some of us can have those kinds of experiences and understand that that's exactly how Native people identify ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question is from Vic, who wonders, is the concept of land ownership a part of the problem? My understanding is that Native Americans didn't own property and the land was communal.
That's correct. I think one of the biggest conflicts between Native and non-Natives is this independence versus interdependence. So what that means for us is that wealth is evenly divided in our communities. So there is no one left behind. If someone needs something, other people share what they have. If they have an abundance or extra, sometimes even pulling back a little bit into their own resources so that everybody has what is needed. That was the same with land in common. So our village, the village that I grew up in, is not a reservation. It isn't a land grant. It is a settlement. It was there, like I said, before Arizona became a state. We were having a lot of trouble with people coming in and buying. That's why I said there are big box stores and garages and businesses that have built up all around us, because if you don't know where this village is, you would miss it completely because of that same thing. So our sense was that that was the land that we migrated onto and settled onto here in Arizona. There are several settlements here in Arizona. It wasn't until after the government started, for instance, saying, well, you didn't pay taxes on this house, so we've now auctioned it off and it belongs to someone else. Well, we had, it's not funny, but we had people being taken out of their homes because their houses had been auctioned away. And it took us a while to regroup and figure out that we needed to do something. And of course, now what we've done is that we've come in with the tribe's help, and they've bought into the deed. So it's held in common, right? Which is getting us more back to our traditional way of looking at things. So if this person is not able to pay their taxes or something it needs to be done, it actually belongs to the whole community, not just an individual. We don't live like that in the United States, right? Everything is a me. It belongs to me. I earned it. It's mine. Let me tell you how much I have. We know that there's a disparity as far as resources are concerned. There are people who have food enough to have 3 meals a day, and there are people who don't have maybe even 1 meal a day. But we're not willing to give up one of our meals to make sure that other person has at least a meal, right? There's a lot of that kind of system going on in the world that we live in. So it's very difficult for us.
Yeah. Maybe Mindy can answer this. Pat's been wondering, as I listen, I've been wondering how we can learn about the Anishinaabe people who lived here originally, and if any live in our area today.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, we are as was put in the chat, we are on Anishinaabe territory that was both ancestral, historical, and contemporary. And I just want to emphasize the contemporary. There is a very large Anishinaabe community here in Lansing. They are very active. There are opportunities to. There's lots of connections. The Indigenous youth. There's an Indigenous youth educational program that's run through the Lansing schools, and there are many community gatherings that people kind of engage in. So the community is here. They've remained here and been here. Oftentimes it's kind of been thought of Lansing as an area where, we within Michigan, of course, we have multiple communities and both recognized, state recognized, and federally recognized tribes. And there's kind of sometimes an assumption that they're in Upper Michigan and so forth, and that those communities kind of feed Lansing. But in fact, Lansing has historically always had a very vibrant and very active Indigenous community. So they're here. And I think going back to the issue of the land acknowledgement, one of the things about acknowledging the land is opening up that space and saying, we do recognize this is the contemporary land of Anishinaabe people. And they are welcome. I think oftentimes they don't feel welcome to speak up. They are oftentimes relegated to an idea of somewhat of a history, but the community is very much here, is very much engaged. And so it's just a matter of, I think we do need to do some more, just kind of seeing the resources that are already here, engaging with the communities. And I just want to echo the issue of listening. They are here, they are speaking. I think that sometimes we need to learn how to listen much better. So there are other, Michigan State, of course, has the Native American Institute that actually kind of coordinates with all of the tribes in the area. There's a very active student organization on campus at Michigan State University for both graduate and undergraduate Native students, both who are from Michigan, but also nationally as well. So the people are here, and I think that there are many opportunities. I'm happy to serve as a link or liaison if individuals are interested in kind of more direct sort of engagement and action. I also do want to just kind of also draw our attention that Isabella Reservation is not is only 60 miles north of here in Mount Pleasant. And of course, the Saginaw Chippewa community, there's a tremendous amount of engagement with the Saginaw Chippewa community who are our neighbors. And I just want to draw attention to Zebawing, the cultural center that the Saginaw Chippewa community supports. It's a wonderful resource, and as well as the Saginaw Chippewa Tribal College. And an entire curriculum there that revolves around kind of educating people about the Anishinaabe communities.
Well, that's excellent, Mindy. That's wonderful.
And I think that's wonderful because, you know, we get taught in school that Native Americans once were here but are gone. And realizing that they are present among us, I think, is a really great learning opportunity for all of us.
Yeah.
Don wonders if someone is adopted into a Native tribe, are that person's offspring also then tribe members?
No.
No.
No. This is really about relationship. Unless that the folks in the entire family continue to be intertwined with each other, that's not generally understood as something that is passed down. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm wondering in the last few minutes we have left is if you or us, Debbie, what do you think would be the first steps we should take after we have these conversations?
Well, I think you've already taken them, Kit. You know, I think the fact that you are engaging in these conversations, not only with myself, but the rest of the lineup that I've looked at, you know, I'm looking forward to watching the rest of the interactions. It's good for us to engage, I think, with history, and knowledge really is power. You know, it is a way for us to interact as a church. You know, I think that there's something that I would say about the church's ability to act as the agent of reconciliation, particularly when we ourselves are not willing to change the systems in which we function. That might, you know, go over into a political conversation as well, as we talk about how we vote and who we vote for, and how we allow decisions to be made without taking a stand. You know, I think one of the parts of what Mindy was just describing about interacting with these communities that are around you, even going to the museum, even going and being invited into community gatherings that are open, are steps in showing that you really do have an interest, not just making a phone call and setting up an appointment to have somebody come and speak to you, but you yourselves going. That's why I was describing in our Arizona model the partnerships, that it's a two-way street. There are people going back and forth. But we have to hold our church accountable. And if we're not willing to do that, if we're not willing to hold our politicians accountable, things will not change. They continue to go on because the system's got a lot of power. And it's got a power to continue the wheels turning in the direction that they've been turning. So it really does mean that if somebody is a delegate, for instance, to General Convention, you know, that I served with Bonnie Anderson on the dais one time, just making sure that everybody who came to the podium was called on at the right time when they had something to say. But if you're not informed and you just vote yes or just vote no, and you know, you don't really have a handle on what those mean, that's why I think these resolutions at General Convention, like the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery, how many of your folks don't even know what the doctrine of discovery is, or why that's an issue, or why did the Episcopal Church lead the way? And we should be asking ourselves, why is it that the Episcopal Church is not talking about what we did as much as other people are talking about what we did? You know, do book studies, you know, Roseanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, you know, do a study and have people read it together and enter into those conversations. It's eye-opening.
Yeah, we have a couple questions in the chat. Mindy, do you know about the Nokomis Center in Okemos, and is that a good place to do some learning?
Yeah, most definitely. So it's a little bit irregular right now about how it's staffed, but Nokomis has always been a very good center. They've had, I mean, it's a small sort of it's a small sort of space, but what it provides is a really important sort of cultural gathering. They've had language classes there for community members. It's been kind of a site for a lot of kind of gatherings. Again, I'm not quite sure. In terms of right now, how much they're kind of open for to the public,
Yeah.
but it's a wonderful place that there's a lot of people who come in and out of.
Okay. And then Lynn was wondering, because her brother and sister-in-law are on the board of Central Ohio Native Americans, and is there any coordination between state groups across state lines?
Between state groups of Native people,
Yeah.
or generally speaking, I would say it's not a common theme, particularly because of the sovereignty issues. We do have intertribal groups that work when there are numbers of tribes in a geographic area that all will band together in order to gain some strength. But I don't think that under most circumstances, Native people's tribal identity is theirs, right? And it's difficult also because languages, it isn't like everybody speaks the same language. All of the, there are 560 some tribes in the United States. If you can imagine how many languages are associated with that, then asking people to work together if they're working on, say, for instance, cultural sovereignty or language preservation or food even issues, they could vary so differently.
Yeah.
Is there another?
No, why don't we need to wrap up too?
Okay,
Yeah.
before we go, I want to first of all, thank you, Debbie, for helping us coordinate getting masks out to tribes at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes,
Dottie's masks got to the tribe.
Dottie is on the cast on the chat, who I assume Don's typing, but I assume Dottie's it too, who sewed a bunch of those, but she was not the only one. Ellen and Vic are around too. Ellen sewed a bunch of those.
Well, then they should know that they went to the Tohono O'odham tribe. Right. They went to the capital of the O'odham tribe in cells, and they were distributed into the areas that are along the border. And a lot of these folks do not have running water or electricity. So it was really, really a welcome gift. We paired your masks along with hand sanitizer and sent them off in little packs. So thank you.
And so at this point, there's been a lot of press about how the Navajo Nation has handled COVID. How are communities across Arizona, tribal communities, doing today?
Well, and that's really a great question, Donna, because we rely an awful lot on knowing something because it's on the news.
Yep.
And the news is not necessarily a good source of news. So we know that there was high infection rates on the Navajo Nation because they got a lot of press. And God bless them, I know that they struggled a lot and there were a lot of challenges there. We had at least 3 tribes in Arizona that got very near extinction. The rate of infection on the White Mountain Apache tribe was higher than the Navajo Nation's infection rate, but nobody talked about that. So there's a difference again, and then we can start talking about disparity of health resources and what's available for folks and how those things, even the vaccinations now, and I'm sure in your community that's a good question to ask. Are they getting access to that? Our intertribal government agency that includes almost all the tribes in Arizona really banded together and demanded from the U.S. government the resources to get vaccinations. And that's how I even got vaccinated, because I couldn't get one going through the normal channels. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Well, it's time to wrap up, and we are so grateful for COVID and Zoom in this particular instance, or we never would have had Debbie with us. So there's always a little bit of grace, even in the middle of a whole bunch of weirdness. And thank you for just beginning to get us thinking about all this. And we really value your time that you spent with
Oh,
us. Thank you so much.
thank you. God bless you all. I
God
love you,
bless you
Donna.
too.
You too.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Debbie.
Mindy.
Thank you very much.